Welcome to Morning in the Marshaverse. I'm here because last night I taped a segment that after I checked my notes, I realized I hadn't said everything I wanted to say. So I forced myself to stay up with the happy day people and re-record what I meant to say. And what I wanted to talk about was how Donald Trump exposes America's fundamental truth, which is that everything you know is a lie. And because everything we know is a lie, it's easy to accept his lies as being true. Somebody made up everything we've been taught. And this concept is not new, even though I came to these conclusions on my own, from my own observations as America's foremost comediographer and sheologian. I graduated, in case you don't know, from the Warfield School of Comedy at MFU, which stands for Marsha Francine University, and so UMF works too. But I figured that since everything we know is made up anyway, whether it's recently made up or was made up hundreds or thousands of years ago, somebody had an idea and created a document, a building of some sort of record. And then from that point on, we've been playing telephone with that truth. And so, of course, a lot of things get lost in translation, they get lost in interpretation, and some concepts are just not understood. So we end up with having to piece together various parts of stories that we're told, because all of our history is told to us in stories. And so stories are easily shared and easily manipulated. But like I said, the idea that everything we're taught in this country is a lie is not a new concept. Jane Elliott has said it many times, and here in this video I'm about to post a little snippet of, she says it again.
Victor Hugo said, "No force on earth can stop an idea whose time has come." The idea of one race, the human race, is an idea whose time has come. We are not going to be able to stop it no matter what they do. They can elect Trump after Trump after Trump, and that will not stop the idea that there's only one race on the face of the earth. It's the human race, and we are all members of it. You and I are cousins. Now, if you don't like being my cousin, that's too bad for you. But we are all in the same family. We are members of the family of man.
You say that all whites are racist. Can you expound on that, please?
Any white person who was born, raised, and schooled in the United States of America, if you aren't a racist, you're a miracle. Either that or you decided to educate yourself. Because education in this country is about white is right, brown's all right, black's got to stand back. Yellow's mellow, but whites, we educate in a way that says that white males have done all the adventures, have made all the adventures, have done all the discovering, have made everything that is good and has been accomplished according to social studies, which is actually anti-social studies, by white males. It's a lie. But we do that in order to maintain the myth of white superiority. The myth of race has to be maintained at all costs in this country. Because if white people have to give up the color of their skin as being something that makes them perfect, what do they have left? If we start teaching the truth about history, if we start teaching about Nile Valley contributions to civilization, it will totally change the way we conduct ourselves in the classroom. It will have to. Columbus didn't discover America. You can't discover a place where people are already living. But we celebrate that every October. It's a lie. We need to get over, we need to stop telling the myths and start telling the truth.
So when you tell people that they're racist, and it must have some kind of effect, because most people will say, I'm not racist.
I'm not a racist. Why, some of my best friends are black.
Right.
Yeah, and then you say, name one. Or this one, I don't see color. And when some woman says to me, I don't see color, I say, I knew that. If you saw color, you wouldn't dye your hair that way. Or I say, if you saw color, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants. I believe that you don't see color. It's an attempt to deny skin color. And it's an attempt to deny what's wrong with seeing the color of my skin. Is it all right for you to see me kind of pink? That's okay for me. I don't mind. And I suspect that you don't mind being seen the color you are. You have a right to be what you are. And until people in this country and people in this world get it into their heads that the first modern human beings that evolved on this earth were black women. They evolved in sub-Saharan Africa about 280,000 years ago, and every human being on the face of the earth today has the memory of those black women's genetic structure in their genes. Now, we don't want to admit that, but that's the way it is. And as people moved farther and farther from the equator, their bodies produced less and less melanin, so their hair, their skin, and their eyes got lighter. As they moved into the east, they ate a lot of fish and a lot of vegetables, so their skin took on a different tone. I found that out when I was raising little kids. My husband worked in a supermarket. He was the head of the produce department. And they had lots of oranges that they couldn't sell, so he'd bring them home. And I was feeding my kids orange juice like you never saw in your life. They began to have an orange cast to their skin. I thought they had a liver problem. So I took him to the doctor, and she said, what are you feeding these kids? I said, well, lots of orange juice. She said, stop it if you want them to stop being orange. Now, if you think that skin color isn't anything other than the body's natural reaction to the natural environment, get over it.
So, if all white people are racist, according to you, can they be reprogrammed?
Of course they can. Of course they can. Of course they can be. It's called education. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. Now, I know you can change them. The second year I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in my classroom, it was filmed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They gave me a copy of that film. I showed it to my father. My father was about 59 years old at the time. He's been a farmer all his life. He raised six kids, lost one, raised six. Watched that film as a 59-year-old man. When it was over, he stood up, and with tears in his eyes, he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his overalls, his bib overalls, and said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. Nobody had dare say to me, this doesn't work, this is too harsh, this isn't necessary, you can't teach an old dog new tricks because they're wrong. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can teach people to give up the myth of racism. Somebody taught the Greeks to give up the myth that the sun was a god in a golden chariot that went across the sky every morning. They believed that for hundreds of years. We have believed the myth of 3 or 4 races, different races in this country, for long enough. 572 years or something like that is enough of that.
But she's not the only one. James Loewen, who wrote Lies My Teacher Told Me, and Sundown Towns, a book about how all across America there have been towns, and still are, towns where black people are not welcome much during the day, but they are really unwelcome after dark. And some had prominent signs that said, don't let the sun catch you. Don't let sundown catch you here. Bad things would happen. But in his book, Lies His Teacher Told Me, or Lies My Teacher Told Me, he exposes the truth of the stories, the mythical stories, the happy, fanciful, basically patriarchal, white supremacist, straight white man truths that we're taught. And in an interview from NPR, he says, my first full-time teaching job was at a black college, Tougaloo College in Mississippi. I had 17 new students in my new second semester freshman sociology seminar, and I didn't want to do all the talking the first day of class, so I asked them, okay, what is Reconstruction? What comes to your mind from that period? And what happened to me was an aha experience, although you might better consider it a oh no experience. 16 out of my 17 students said, well, Reconstruction was the period right after the Civil War when blacks took over the government of the southern states, but they were too soon out of slavery, and so they screwed up and white folks had to take control again. He says these are 3 lies. 1, black people never took over the government of the southern states. All the southern states had white governors throughout the period. All but 1 had white legislative majorities. 2nd, the Reconstruction governments did not screw up across the South. Without exception, they built the best state constitution that the southern states have ever had. Mississippi in particular had better government during Reconstruction than at any later point in the 19th century. A third lie would be whites didn't take control. It was white supremacist Democrats. Indeed, it was the original Ku Klux Klan. So I thought to myself, my gosh, what must it do to you to believe that the one time your group was center stage in American history, they screwed up? And there are other foundational lies that we were taught. Some fanciful mythological kinds of stories like George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. He did not. He didn't have wooden teeth. He was a slave owner who drank too much, sanctioned rum and molasses smuggling to avoid paying the taxes on the molasses that made the rum. And he led an insurrection of like-minded patriots who didn't want to pay taxes on their booze either. American production of rum boomed as the colonies traded excess grains for molasses with Caribbean territories. By the English Navigation Acts, the colonies were restricted to trading for molasses with fellow English colonies. However, American colonial merchants flouted the regulations by smuggling cheaper molasses from French colonies, particularly Saint Dominique, Haiti, in the West Indies. With the 1773 Molasses Act, Britain imposed legislation aimed at limiting colonial access to foreign molasses. Instead, large-scale smuggling of molasses became even more commonplace. While the Molasses Act should have raised 25,000 pounds each year, British officials only collected 259 pounds in 1735. So, the Molasses Act anticipated controversial British policies toward the American colonies in the 1760s. In 1764, Britain passed the Sugar Act. Like other prominent colonists, Washington interacted with rum in many aspects of his life. For instance, in order to win election in the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, he attracted voters with charm, entertainment, and rum. During his campaign, he supplied voters with 28 gallons of rum, 50 gallons of rum punch, and 82 gallons of wine, beer, and cider. And just as he used rum to gain political victory, he also used the drink to boost morale among his soldiers. In June 1779, he informed General Alexander McDougall, I have written to the commissary urging him, if possible, to have a pretty good stock of rum at the forts to supply more constantly the fatigue parties. Washington shared the view of many people at the time that liquor helped to keep tired people awake. A supply of rum could mean the difference between an exhausted soldier and one ready to wage war. Finally, he used rum to stabilize plantation life at Mount Vernon. In exchange for a day's work, he gave his slaves an allowance of liquor. When Washington accused James Butler, an overseer at Mount Vernon, of allowing his slaves 36 pints of rum, Butler claimed that he had given a much smaller portion to no more than a pint of rum and a pound of meat to each man. Even as Washington supplied rum to his enslaved workers, he also mandated limits to the practice. So, the colonists objected to having to pay taxes on the molasses that made the rum. Whether it was the sole reason for the traitorous acts of rebellion that led to the Revolutionary War or not is something for historians to educate us on. However, we're not usually told about the influence of booze in the American Revolution. And there is a public historian on TikTok who does go into this subject more. His name is Tad Stormer, and I follow him. He's his specialty, his field of study is the revolution and its myths. He tells us all about the Patriot Myth that we are inundated with, indoctrinated with from birth almost. So these lies, pretty common. Everybody knows them. We all pretty much know they are lies. We know the South didn't win the Civil War. We know that they weren't heroes. They were traitors. Even the founding fathers were traitors to their government. That's why they had to overthrow it. And it's also why people today, calling themselves patriots, can be persuaded to try to accomplish the same thing by people with bad intentions whose goal is to manipulate them into doing their bidding. But the foundational lies go even further back. We know that Jesus was not white. He could not have been white. We don't know what he looked like. The historical evidence of whether he existed or not is sketchy. People accept on faith who he is, what he did, what he means. However, when you know that he could not have been white, and you know that that is the image that has been exported around the world and used to convert people into the Christian faith, and was used to indoctrinate enslaved people into believing that this image of a white man was their salvation, you have to question those motives, not the initial motives. We could just, let's say, okay, they didn't mean no harm. They were just painting Jesus in the way that they imagined in their own image. Fine. But in the ensuing hundreds of years, that no one has sought to change it. People have doubled down on this is the one true religion, and this kind of surfer dude, easy listen, easy rock singer image of Jesus is real, and people fervently believe that. This has to be deliberate, and it has to be to reduce Jesus to a spokesmodel in much the same way Aunt Jemima didn't make no pancakes, but she's on the box. In the book of John, in the New Testament, they tell us everything is a lie. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So if the beginning of your religion is the Word, that means it started with in the beginning when somebody wrote this story. It doesn't say it was true. It doesn't say, it says that that word, though, became God. Now, religious scholars will debate this, will come up with other interpretations, will tell you that what I'm reading literally is not the case. But I don't pay no attention to them because that's what it says. Whoever put it there for whatever reason, that's not the issue right now. The issue is, it says in the beginning was the Word. Now, these examples are only a few of the many lies that we're told explicitly and implicitly. Like white people, white supremacy. White people are not superior. They're people. Men are not superior. Black people who were enslaved were not hapless, ignorant animals willingly cooperating and co-conspirators in their own enslavement and oppression, nor were women. Southern secessionists, traitors, were not heroes, and these lies shape our understanding and shape our obligations and responsibilities, and probably should be addressed so that everybody understands why all men are created equal is a lie. It was a deliberate lie at the time. And because so many of the people involved were slave owners. And so all men in their mind were not created equal. Some were not even men in their minds, and they didn't include women at all. So in their minds, women were not equal to men. And this logic has followed us from the time of that writing to today. And these lies are taught to all American children, whether in school, at home, on TV, and in movies and popular fiction. And they all serve to perpetuate the myth of white supremacy in an attempt to maintain greed-based control. Without question or complaint, we're supposed to accept these truths under threat of incarceration or death, and are ingrained in us all with predictable results. They allow people waving traitor flags to claim to be patriots, who, after all, were traitors to their government too. That's why in 2019, when the 1619 Project was released, it sent shockwaves through racist, i.e. institutional, systemic white America. Oh my God, they want to teach the truth to our kids. They'll hate us and side with them. This was the unspoken fear. However, it was obvious and alluded to in the context of what was said. So that disinformation, or some disinformation, was intentionally added to the misinformation flames that were raging on social media at the time by enemies of truth, those foreign and domestic. So we're getting a lot of information, but a lot of it is just not the result of innocent telephoning of information, but were deliberately put into the national conversation to mitigate the damage of incorporating all of American truth into its history teaching. And so war was waged aggressively against wokeness and DEI and CRT, affirmative action, civil rights. They've made no secret of the fact that the goal is to roll back America's experience to before the Civil War, when, as I said, white supremacy was maintained, to quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary, legislatively, judicially, by custom, by local law, and through violence. So many towns and settlements that black people founded were destroyed. Some are underwater. Some were burned to the ground. Some were rioted on and destroyed along with the people. And some were abandoned by people fleeing the violence and the potential and the threat of more violence to come. So these things came under attack because the 1619 Project could not become part of the educational system as had been proposed at the time. It was set to become part of the American educational system curriculum, and that was not acceptable. So laws had to be rolled back. Heroic statues of defeated traitors had to be allowed to stand. The myth of white American Christian male supremacy had to be protected or threaten the nation's place in the world, at the top of the food chain, at all costs, by any means necessary. And a person, a hapless dupe, a stooge, a puppet, had to be found to fan the obligatory flames of outrage necessary to keep the myth and lies going. Enter Donald Trump, a man who could be bought for the price of a compliment, a man who fundamentally hates America for not loving him, a man who's not very smart, but clever enough to know how to motivate people who are similarly fueled by hate and fear and flattery. You can save our country, he says. You have to, or it will be taken over by those people. Real Americans have to fight like patriots. Patriots who carry Confederate flags to overthrow a legitimate election. And with a little help from other like-minded scared people with too much to lose, if the masses wake up, these frightened American citizens can be motivated to declare war on their own fellow citizens. Again, unless we accept the teachings of Shiology from the book of Marsha. And embrace the true promise of our country. All people are created equal. And when we accept that and we vote, we win. So, vote and let's elect the one person in the contest who has the qualifications, who runs circles around her opponent as far as being ready to do the job of the promise of the future instead of the promise of going back to the sordid past. And that person is Kamala Harris. Elect President Harris. It's time to have a different approach, to throw away the bullying, the lies, the disinformation, the pissing contest and global pissing contest, and replace it with something akin to real diplomacy, real consideration, real protection of our citizens and others. And that person is Kamala Harris. Vote, because when we vote, we win. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk and listening to my take on the lies that fuel the mainstream world, but not here in the Marshaverse. In the Marshaverse, we reject those kind of lies as truth and embrace all people who see things similarly. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you will let me know how you feel in the comments. I hope you do so respectfully and without a lot of vitriol. That's not going to help, and it probably won't stand on my pages. But I will talk to you if you have another point of view. So, it's been my pleasure. I'll see you again next time.